There is a version of history you were taught, and there is the version that was happening underneath it. The version you were taught had heroes and villains, progress and setbacks, causes and effects that made logical sense. A story moving forward. The version underneath is quieter. It doesn't have heroes, it has mechanisms, patterns, the same moves made by different people in different centuries, producing the same results, because the moves work. They work on populations, they work on individuals, they work on people who consider themselves informed, who consider themselves critical thinkers, who would never describe themselves as controlled. People exactly like you, not as an insult, as an observation, because the system that's running on you right now is designed specifically for people who think they're above it. That's what makes it effective. Let's talk about how it works. When history is taught as a sequence of events, it produces something very specific, a feeling of distance, the sense that what happened to other people, in other times, under conditions that no longer apply. That feeling is useful to the people who benefit from you not recognizing the pattern, because the pattern didn't end. It evolved. It put on new clothes, learned new language, found new institutions to operate through, and kept producing the same results that it has always produced, because the underlying mechanism never changed. The mechanism is simple: control what people believe is possible, and you control what they do, control what feels normal, and you never have to force anything. Control the story, and you control the reality people are living inside. Tonight we're going through 5 patterns, each one older than you think, each one more present than you're comfortable with, and each one, once you see it, impossible to unsee. Pay attention. Not to the historical examples, to the structure underneath them. That's where the real information is. The Roman Empire didn't fall in a day. It didn't announce its arrival either. When Augustus Caesar consolidated power over the entire Roman world, he did something that almost no ruler before him had attempted at that scale. He kept everything that looked like the old system and quietly emptied it of meaning. The Senate still met. The elections still happened. The titles still existed. Consuls were still appointed. Laws were still debated. The full formal architecture of the Roman Republic preserved, intact, functioning. And underneath all of it, one man controlled the legions, the treasury, the provinces, the appointments, the outcomes of every decision that mattered. Augustus never called himself king. He refused the title explicitly, publicly, multiple times, which made him more trusted, not less powerful. Because here is the first pattern: visible power generates resistance. Invisible power generates compliance. The most effective control never announces itself. It presents itself as something else entirely, as stability, as tradition, as the natural order, as leadership freely given by a man who simply loves his country. And the people living inside it experienced it not as domination, but as peace, as the return of order after decades of chaos, as relief. The chaos had been real, the relief was real, and the control that came with it felt like a reasonable price. It always does. Now, think about the systems you live inside. The ones that feel like the natural order. The ones whose rules you follow without being instructed to. The ones that have always been there, so long that questioning them doesn't feel necessary. Feels almost strange. Who designed those rules? When? And what they were designed to produce? The answer to that question is never what the system itself will tell you. In 1095, Pope Urban II gave a speech. We don't have the exact words. Multiple versions were recorded by different witnesses. Each slightly different. What we have is the result. Within months of that speech, tens of thousands of people across Europe had left everything, homes, families, livelihoods, to march thousands of miles toward Jerusalem. Most of them died on the road, in battle, from disease, from starvation. No one forced them. No army conscripted them. No law compelled them. They chose to go freely because the narrative had defined what freedom meant. It had told them who they were, what history required of them, what God demanded, what the cost of staying home would be, not in this life, but in the one after. The narrative was total. It explained everything, gave meaning to suffering, made sacrifice feel like the only rational response, made staying home feel like cowardice, like failure, like something that said something about your soul. This is the second pattern. Whoever controls the story controls what options feel available, not what people choose, what feels like a choice worth making, what the emotional weight of each option is, what it costs, psychologically, socially, spiritually, to go against the dominant narrative. The mechanism doesn't require a pope. It doesn't require religion. It requires a story, total enough, credible enough, emotionally weighted enough that living outside it feels dangerous. Every era has had one. Every era believed theirs was simply the truth, not a narrative, the truth. What is the narrative of your moment? Not the one you disagree with, the one you agree with so completely that it doesn't feel like a narrative at all, that one. That's the one worth examining. In 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment. Ordinary people, recruited through a newspaper ad, brought into a laboratory at Yale University, told they were participating in a study on learning. They were instructed to administer electric shocks to another person, an actor behind a screen. Whenever that person answered a question incorrectly, the shocks increased with each wrong answer. The actor cried out in pain, pleaded to stop, eventually went completely silent. The participants could not see the actor, but they could hear everything, and they could see the voltage dial in front of them, climbing. When they hesitated, the experimenter said 4 things. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. 65% of participants administered what they believed was the maximum voltage. 450 volts, labeled on the machine simply XX. They weren't sadists. They weren't cruel people. They were ordinary people, inside a context that had defined the action as required, as what responsible participants did, as what the situation called for, and the situation, not their character, produced the behavior. This is the third pattern. Human behavior is not primarily determined by character. It is determined by context, by what the situation defines as normal, as required, as the obvious thing to do. Change the context, and the same person behaves differently. This is not a comfortable idea, because it means that the protection against doing terrible things is not simply being a good person. Good people have done terrible things. When the context was structured to make terrible things feel like procedure, like paperwork, like just doing your job. Hannah Arendt sat in a courtroom in Jerusalem in 1961, watching the trial of Adolf Eichmann. She expected a monster. She found something that disturbed her far more. An ordinary man, a bureaucrat, organized, efficient, proud of his work. A man who had helped coordinate the transportation of millions of people to their deaths, and who described it in testimony the way you would describe any administrative challenge. She called it the banality of evil, not because evil is trivial, because the people who implement it usually are. The context decided, the person followed. When you find yourself doing something because the situation seems to require it, because everyone around you is doing it, because not doing it would feel strange, ask who designed the context and what it was designed to produce. There are 2 instruments used together across every system of sustained control in the historical record: fear and belonging. Fear is the easier one to understand. It narrows. When the brain perceives a genuine threat, the systems responsible for complex, nuanced, critical thinking become less available, not less intelligent. Less available. The threat response system takes priority. It needs answers fast. Simple answers, clear answers. Who is the enemy? What is the danger? What do I need to do to be safe? In that state, people are not looking for complexity, they're looking for a direction to face. And whoever provides that direction acquires extraordinary influence, not through argument, through the relief of clarity in a moment of fear. Belonging is the second instrument, and it is subtler, more durable, more difficult to recognize from inside it. Humans are social animals in a precise biological sense. Social exclusion activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The need to belong, to be inside the group, to be recognized as one of us, is not a preference. It is a drive, operating at the same level as hunger, as thirst. When fear establishes the threat, and belonging offers protection from it, the combination produces something reliable: loyalty. not the reasoned loyalty of someone who has evaluated a system and chosen it. The emotional loyalty of someone whose identity is now tied to the group, who cannot question the group without questioning themselves. Every authoritarian system in history has used this combination. Establish the external threat, offer the internal belonging, define who is inside, define what membership costs, define who is outside and what they represent. And then you don't need to force anything. The group enforces itself. Members police each other. Deviation is punished socially before the state ever needs to act. Look at the groups you belong to, not the ones you chose deliberately, the ones you absorb, the ones whose opinions feel like your opinions, whose enemies feel like your enemies, whose norms feel like common sense. How much of what you believe is what you believe, and how much of it is the price of belonging? You don't have to answer that out loud, but you should answer it honestly. Everything in this video, you've probably been processing from a comfortable position, the observer's position, looking at historical populations, at people who were controlled, at systems that operated on others. That position feels safe. It is not accurate. You are inside systems right now that you did not choose, that feel natural, because they were designed to feel natural, that are shaping what you believe, what you question, and what never occurs to you to question in ways you have not fully mapped. The news that feels credible to you feels credible partly because of where you first encountered it, who recommended it, what it confirmed that you already suspected. The opinions that feel obviously correct feel correct partly because of the community you belong to, the conversations you've had, the social cost of believing otherwise. The ideas that feel dangerous or irrational feel that way partly because of where the boundary of acceptable thinking was drawn. In the specific environment you moved through, by specific people with specific interests. And none of this was done to you maliciously. Most of it wasn't done deliberately at all. It was simply the system operating, the way systems operate, producing the people it needs, the way every system always has. The philosopher René Descartes, sitting alone in a heated room in the winter of 1641, tried to strip away every belief that could be doubted, everything inherited, everything assumed, everything that had arrived through culture or education or the quiet pressure of being alive in a specific time and place. He wanted to find what remained, what he actually knew, what was genuinely his. He found very little, not because nothing is true, because the tools he was using to evaluate his beliefs had themselves been shaped by the beliefs he was trying to evaluate. You are in the same position. The thinking you're using to assess the world was formed inside the world you're trying to assess. That's not a reason to stop thinking. It's a reason to think differently, to hold your certainties with slightly more awareness of where they came from, to notice when something feels obviously true, who it serves, who defined obvious, and when. That noticing, that specific, uncomfortable, patient attention is not paranoia. It's the beginning of actually thinking for yourself, which is rarer than it sounds and more valuable than almost anything else you can develop. You came into tonight with a sense of history as something distant. Events in the past, patterns in other people, systems that shaped other lives. That's not where you are now. You've seen how power disguises itself as normalcy, how narrative shapes the boundaries of thinkable thought, how context produces behavior that character alone cannot explain, how fear and belonging combine into something that doesn't need force, because it doesn't need to, and how none of this, not a single part of it, stopped at any point in the past. It evolved, it found new forms, new platforms, new language, new institutions, and it is operating right in the things that feel obvious to you, in the things that feel dangerous to question, in the groups that feel like home, in the threats that feel undeniable. You can't unknow this, that's not comfortable. But comfort was never the point. The point was clarity. And clarity, in a world structured to prevent it, is the most dangerous thing you can have. Not dangerous to you, dangerous to every system that depends on you not having it. Carry it carefully, use it honestly. And remember, the moment you stop questioning what feels obvious is the moment the pattern closes around you again. Don't stop questioning.